So, hi everybody. This is a little environment piece of concept art I'm doing. Um, just gonna comment through it. You might not know that, but I have done a lot of concept art environments, especially on movies. I still do them. I still work on movies, but because of the NDA, non-disclosure agreement, I can never show them to anybody, which is kind of annoying. So a lot of things that I'm doing on the side in sort of the background, as well as teaching and marking and all, preparing. I'm doing an MA in illustration at the same time as at the moment. I'm doing pieces of concept art for movies, mostly of environments, sort of mood pieces, but I can never show them. So I decided for a change to do one just on my own, in between everything else, so I could show that I'm not just doing characters. I do a lot of characters because it's very relaxing to me, especially speed painting and characters are kind of a lot of fun to do. When you're very busy, you get straight to something, some big action scene or something, and it's a lot of fun. But here I decided, okay, let's do an environment piece based on a book that my wife wrote called The Chronicles of the Tree. A really fantastic book with an extremely interesting setup. The whole world, it's a kind of a young adult high fantasy story. They're published by Harper and Collins in Australia. You can find them. Little plug there, but they are really, really good books. So it's all set up in a gigantic tree that is the size of a continent. The tree just goes on forever, up and down, sideways, and the bottom is mysterious, where most people don't know what's below. There are clouds and something they call the storm. And the technology that these people live in is about sort of like 16th century Europe. So really nice setup, and there's this main city called Argos City in the mainly in the first book that I'm trying to draw. So I was my main idea was to create something enormous, so some gigantic city because I wanted it's tree and it would be very easy to make things too small. So you can see there I'm painting some branches above, but I think they're too small. Even though they're gigantic branches, I think they will throw people off in terms of the actual size that I want to convey. I'm using mostly I'm doing stuff in black and white because I'm focusing on composition and trying to tell a lot by just using custom shapes and suggesting more than showing. This is what is called a mood piece. So it's going to be quite detailed, but not photographic. It's going to look like a gigantic place with lots of details, but it's not going to look like a photo from the movie. It's not going to be like a 3D model rendered. It still is a piece of concept art. I've seen a lot of those being used in the film industry, but I've never seen speed painting being used. If you do a speed paint, something that is done very fast with an action scene, most directors most directors won't react well to that. They'll say, "Well, what is that? Is my movie gonna look like that? I don't understand that. I don't see my main actor that I'm gonna pay so much money to get. I want this actor with this suit I'm buying in front of this building and blah blah blah. It needs to look like exactly like the movie." So uh, they don't react very well to a speed painting. Now, it might get used to show, say, your manager or so the art director. Okay, I'm thinking doing something like that, and some of them might get it. But most of the time, you would want to do a fully uh, well finished, polished piece of concept art that you can show the directors. Some directors have great imagination and extremely great knowledge, like uh, Guillermo del Toro, Peter Jackson, Steven Spielberg. Those I've worked on for. They've got a lot of cultural knowledge, and they can immediately see what's going on. Guillermo del Toro, for example, he knows so much about sort of from pop culture all the way to fine art, and it's a pleasure to talk to him because he knows exactly, and he will tell you something, and if you know it, you'll be quite impressed. Some obscure comic book artist from this or that area. It's a real pleasure to work for him. Uh, these three main directors there I've worked on are fantastic to work for, and others, there are a few others. The name escapes me at the moment, but others that I've worked for uh, are not as knowledgeable. They're knowledgeable in their field. They know films. They know that very well, but they don't particularly know sort of pop culture. Or, or they know just the main things. Some of these artists. That's it. They don't go beyond that. So for them, you have to work slightly differently. But to work for a great director like Guillermo del Toro is a great pleasure. Here, I have discovered this brush, this kind of square brush that creates these sort of random shapes, and I thought, oh, I can use that. I put that in perspective. That will save me time. The brushes in Photoshop don't make you they don't turn you into a good artist because you have magical brushes. However, they will help creating more than when you put in there. If you know how to control them, you have these grunty brushes, brushes with texture, things like that. That will really help if you know what you're doing. But they will not, I think concept artist Feng Zhu always says that if you use just normal brushes, you should be able to do something. And I've seen great pieces of concept art by people who started in Photoshop, done with just one brush, one layer. That's all you need, pretty much. I'm the same. I like very little layers. I work on mainly one layer, environment piece like that, 2 3 layers maximum. As soon as you start adding lots of layers, it gets a bit complex and hard to handle. And chances are you will paint on the wrong one. And you might need to do that. There are cases where you need to really use several layered files. So get all the details here and there because the director wants this change in that particular area. And so there's a case for both of these techniques, if you will. But this, as a piece of mood board concept art, a bit like what Feng Zhu does, and a lot of people, you don't want too much layers. You just want to paint and know how to handle perspective, depth of field, all these things. This is what again Feng Zhu calls the fundamentals, but they're the things I teach the students, which is the composition, lighting, depth of field, lights and shadows, etc. Because you're creating this world that doesn't exist. You wanna create uh, show people something that they've never seen before, but you want to create it in a way that is believable, that you actually place people there and they actually see it. And so that's what you're doing. You're using technology and your classical knowledge, if you will, at the service of this crazy place that you are inventing. So I'm trying to slowly build these the background buildings and trying to create areas of interest. So there's like a sort of an island with a bridge, and in the foreground there'll be a sort of a deck. Um, this These people in this particular world, they move on huge dirigible. They go from one city to the next, and they carry like whatever materials and slaves and stuff like that. And it's really interesting setup. So I want to create a kind of a dock, sorry, in the foreground there. And I'm digging into the image, so midground, foreground, background. So I tell the students a lot about that they need to, when they create an image, most of the time the biggest mistake that we make is to have everything sort of mid-ground in mid-shot, just in front of us. And what we want as artists is to create a whole world. So we want to think about things that are behind us that you don't see that might have an influence on the image that you're doing. Shadows, casting shadows, or creating some kind of disturbance in the surface that is in front of you. And then you want a foreground, a midground, a background, and even 5 6 layers of ground like that, so that you really are placing people into this world. You're creating a fantastic world. There is a thing about doing images and struggling. Yeah, so some people say, yeah, what do you do when you struggle? Struggle against an image, and I think there's a case for two scenarios. One is you stick to it and you try and nail it, and you know that you're going to struggle and struggle and struggle, and you'll get somewhere, but it will not be super satisfying. And that's one outcome. The other outcome is to leave it and move on to the next image. So, for example, to work on two, three images at the same time, so you can come back and have your mind fresh. Or even if you come back to an image like 2 days later after you had a walk and or you suddenly see, oh yeah, yeah, I know what's not working. It's this and this. Sometimes a bit of time help you rationalize and have a fresh look on something that you couldn't see when you were working on it. So sometimes it's better to abandon it, and sometimes it's better to stick to it. And I think that sticking to something is when you are building your muscles. So if you think of going, say, you go to the gym and you lift these like 3 reps of weights. The first, or 4 reps, let's say, the first 3 reps you're just doing basic things, and then the fourth one, you're suddenly increasing the weight. That's where you're gonna gain muscles. It's when it's difficult that you gain something. So when you're struggling with an image, basically that's where you want to keep. A lot of the time, that's what I would suggest is that you keep going, you keep insisting, and you keep trying, fighting it. And the benefit will not be on this particular image. The benefit will be down the line later on when you know, 2, 3 images or the next image. Suddenly something will look easier. Will appear easier because you've struggled. You went through this painful period, and you learn. You basically your brain has stretched and expanded. So if there's a case for both scenario, and there is no right answers. I mean, people ask me, should I do this or should I do that? I don't know. You decide. You might make a mistake. You might overwork something that's not worth it, or you might actually learn something. And I've heard some people say that you shouldn't just work for the sake of working. Just mileage is not enough. And yes and no. I think when you're working, obviously you need to have intent. You need to go, okay, I'm going to nail perspective a bit more. I'm going to nail these brush strokes a bit better. I'm going to nail the silhouettes of these characters. I'm going to try and nail coloring a bit better. And so every time you do something, you want to really push it, to try and learn something new in every endeavor that you're taking. So you don't go down, in talent or your skills basically. Uh, the uh, I'm trying to put a lot of roofs in this image because I want it to be really really big. Yeah, this is a city, the main city, the capital city of this whole world, this whole empire, and it's been there for hundreds, maybe thousands of years. And everything is made from the tree. So the roofs that you see there are made of some kind of wood, something from that, from the place there. There's no metal. So really, really interesting. You can see there I'm widening the image because I want this sort of filmic wide shot. I thought it was too narrow and not enough cinematographic and gigantic. So I'm widening the image, and all the while thinking about this mid-ground, this background, and far away. The sky here looks to me a bit flat at this point. You see, a bit later I'll start adding colors. It will still be flat, it will still be not enough depth of field. So imagine this city is not at the top of the tree; it's somewhere in the middle. At the bottom there's a storm, far away down, and up, very high up, there are thinner branches with maybe more houses. So you wouldn't see the sky like that, but there would be, because of the size of the whole thing, there would be atmospheric feel like that. So the clouds that you see in the background, they might not be just the sky, but some sort of atmospheric artifact, if you will. Um, the dirigibles, so I'm trying to place a few dirigibles, but I don't want them to steal the show. I want them to be part of the landscape, part of the story. Yeah, so they'll be there and they create depth because they're big as well and they're far away. So far away dirigible moving left and right, maybe little dots. But I don't want them to be in the foreground, like all details, because then you'll just look at them and you'll think the concept piece is not about the city, but it's about the dirigible. It's a fine line about what you're actually trying to say in an image, because most people will look at an image in 1 second, and they'll tell you it's about this or it's about that. And this is what you're doing. You concept artists, you want to nail the right feel for the right thing, by using by using the knowledge that you have of image making, if you will. And sometimes you just start painting something, detailing dirigible, don't like it, redo it, but don't like it, then remove the whole thing, entirely change your mind. I do a lot of these sort of flipping image, going left and right, just to refresh my mind. So again, you see, this dirigible wasn't working, so I've just left a spot there, just thinking, okay, I'll do it at some other point. Maybe there should be something. Now I've missed maybe 20 minutes there because you haven't seen me change the hue and the colors and adding even more branches and removing the dirigible at the end of the day. So I'm trying to paint the sky and create the depth. I like these the way of coloring the image using curves because it so if you press Control M on Photoshop, you have this long diagonal line that you can move your curve a tiny bit left and right. If you move it too far, it gets really crazy and it's not really useful. If you move it a tiny bit in a zigzag, you have different colors that come up. So, for example, the background, which is a purple gray, and the city, which is another type of gray, have now a different color field to them. So, which is quite nice. I do like this method. Color theory is a thing I teach to the students quite a lot, and I tell them that it's another thing that you are in control. Not everything, or actually, if you want to make something interesting, because you're an artist and a storyteller, you don't want to use what is called literal colors, meaning the sky is always blue, the clouds are always white, the trees are always brown, the leaves are green, etc., etc. People are this color, and I'm going to paint them this color, and the shadows are always black. You can have color in your shadows. Shadows can be colored. People, you can paint people with purple and orange if you want to, and it will still work. People from wherever in the world, if they have if they're European or if they're Africans, you can still paint green and purple, both these type of people, and still make them believable. Color is a thing that has a lot of influence in the images. Uh, if you're more obsessed about the design, then you might want to get more sort of naturalistic colors. I want to create a sort of a strange mood, but you will see that progressively I'm going towards more naturalistic colors, even though I start with these sort of really off, like sort of alternative uh, color vision. Um, I think, I mean, there are, each artist is different. Many people can do things the way they want. Some people are happy using literal colors. Sometimes I will color a whole thing and then go back to desaturation and then recolorize everything because I don't like what I'm doing. Uh, you're at the service of your image. It's not the, excuse me, drinking. It's not the that something that you started detailing because you started detailing is now canon and needs to be finished the way it is. If it doesn't work, you ditch it and you start again. Even though you've detailed things and you kind of beginning to be attached to this or that thing that you just done, it doesn't matter. That's what I like when you look at again Feng Zhu, for example, when he doesn't like something, he just ditch the whole image, and I totally get that. I understand how that works. Yes, people think that every brushstroke they put is sacred, but it isn't. What is sacred is your image. Yeah, your image is you're at the service of your image, and you need to make it work. And no amount of details. Yeah, if you're making uh, something that and you starting detailing this or that area, and then it just doesn't work. There's no point in sticking to it. Just erase it and start again. It might be painful, but you will learn. You will put your mind into this sort of overdrive, and you will think, okay, I really need this area to work now. This is not working. I'm going to start again. This time I'm going to focus. And this sort of hyper focus that you get, the sort of what you get when you every artist when they're lucky get into this thing called the flow, which is that particular time where you forget about the world and you're really into the image. You're at the service of the image, but you can see it appearing in front of you, almost sort of a, it's uncontrollable. Things are happening faster than you think. And it's all your knowledge, your cultural knowledge, your understanding of the world, the things that you've seen, the paintings you watch, the films, anything that you've put in the back of your mind is going to come up at this point and help you achieve this, bypass this sort of overthinking left side of the brain. Yeah, you go to the right side of the brain, which is the intuitive side of the brain. So I'm trying to create this foreground sort of docking stuff that has to look different from something from the real world. Yeah, it cannot be just normal architecture. It cannot be sort of medieval Europe or India or anything. It has to be its own thing. So I'm trying to think. Okay, the dirigibles will come up there and dock there, and then offload stuff, uh, and that's uh, the point of this foreground elements. However, I'm not going to put a dirigible right there because this would be taking, yeah, this would be suddenly the focal point of the whole image, and I don't want that. I want the city to be the focal point. Never lose your mind, your main focus of what you're doing, because if you change, you may change your mind. That's different, but my goal there was to create to show you this huge city, and to leave the city talk for itself rather than have something else happening somewhere else in the foreground. All the while I'm doing this, I'm actually thinking, what is the size? What is the size of this whole thing? And normally in pieces of concept art, a lot of the time you see a little man, a little character, man, woman, whatever, something in the foreground somewhere, or in the midground, that is looking at this environment. So this is a typical trick. It's almost like academic. You see this little character, and it's telling you this is the size of this thing, and that's as far away from me as you can see it. Here I have multiplied the image and flipped it to create sort of like an overlay of strangeness. so so that there's a bit of texture, and I'm going to remove this texture, so it gets more complex in the background, so that your mind is thinking there is more than what is there. Yeah, just doing this overlay of something. This is a thing I've learned from my friend Eduardo Pena. Is a fantastic concept artist. Really advise that you look at his stuff. So good. I just looked at him paint, and he was doing this. He was adding slight overlays on soft lights and stuff like that of stuff that is already there, multiplying the image by itself and creating more intensity by just adding things like that. So this is a good technique, but it can be everything you do. You need to be subtle, so you need to erase. You need to make it very light. You need to not make it sort of overwhelming. Oh, here I'm exaggerating the contrasts because I want to grab a shape in the foreground. I want to make sure the foreground is darker than the midground and the background. Um, the the middle part there of the city is beginning to look good, but I think it still is a bit flat. So later on, I'm going to create another sort of another layer in the foreground with some characters, and another layer behind the docking thing there, and then even more layers further away. I'm saying layers in a image thinking, not layers of Photoshop. So everything is on one layer, as you can see. Maybe there's two layers there, but I've flattened everything. Oh, I discovered this brush there, which is a really good brush. It's kind of like a structure, but it's quite industrial and modern. So I have to use it carefully and put it here and there, uh, almost like far away, so we don't focus too much on it, because it's gonna throw you off if you look at it too much like that. Um, so the image there, the background, he's trying to paint the sky and create a lot of depth, but it still is a bit flat. And this is the battle I have. I want it to be atmospheric and intense, but I don't want it to be flat. I want the background to be really far away and have more buildings. Create this idea that you can walk in these cities for miles, and it almost never ends. This is the thing I was looking. You can get information from everything. So when I was younger, I looked at the magazine Cinefex. When Blade Runner, the original Blade Runner came out, there was making of the city Los Angeles 2023. The city was made with small models, well, quite big models actually. But then they had smaller models in the distance, and then further away they had even smaller models, and then in the far away they had only flat buildings, like just shapes, yeah, in the far away distance. And then they put some smoke and they filmed it like that. And I thought this is so cool. In the background, they don't need to do volume because it's just a shape. So it's a little bit what we're doing here. We're doing shapes. I'm thinking of surface and texture rather than uh, real sort of perspective and things like that. I mean, perspective is extremely important, obviously. It's what create depth of field. But here I am thinking in terms of it's something that has texture onto it, and then there's several here. There's one, two, three. It's kind of clear for us. The image appears clear because we think about that level of haze and things like that. Yeah, sometimes I will up the contrast to grab an element, make it darker, move it back onto itself. These are all Photoshop tricks. If you were to do this image by hand, like a piece of concept art like that, it will take you a whole week. You'd have to do a pencil sketch, you have to polish the pencil sketch, and you have to try the color theory on several little sketches, and then you will paint it with an airbrush, and then some acrylic paint. It would take quite a while to do a big piece like that, and you'd have to be very careful, very sort of left side of the brain, very controlled. Whereas here in Photoshop, we just experiment, we just go with it, and what doesn't work, we ditch. What works, we keep. It's a lot easier. You just try colors, doesn't work. It's been a pleasure that invented this thing, the digital painting. It has its problem too. I mean, sometimes I think the value of a real piece of work, like a real painting, is still better to me. It's still I have more respect for something that is not perfect, but that is done by hand. I've sort of more respect than something that is done digitally. That doesn't mean that digital art doesn't require talent. You need a lot of talent for everything. But I think there is a certain ease of uh, technique. It's a lot easier to change things and to take risks. And, but obviously, since you go faster, directors want more. So when you're producing a piece of artwork, you have to show it the next day or something, or 2 days later if you're lucky. And so it's a double-edged thing. They want more. Oh, you can do an image like that in a day. Then why don't you do five today, five this week, and then next week when the director comes, we'll have all that to look at. Back in 20, 30 years ago, they would just do one, or a bunch of sketches, and then do a beautiful branded one and say, well, we were thinking of this for this particular scene. Maybe you're more careful. Maybe it has more value. I think it does to me personally. But there is a debate. People can disagree and say, no, 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 Photoshop is the way, the way of the master. Um, I am doing the curves. You've seen them, the curves. So now I'm quite happy with the sort of middle part of the image. At the top and the middle, there is quite a lot of depth. There is roofs. You can think you see a lot of structure going on. It's quite far away, and it's intense enough at this point right there. However, the background, well, on the left there, the clouds, they're still too flat. So I'm trying to put clouds, trying to dig into the image to create smaller clouds. I could sort of paint, dig in, make the sky further away, make the clouds more detail in the foreground, etc. But I'm not really happy about that. I think this city, this looks like the edge of the city, and I don't want it to be the edge. I want us to look straight at it, and I want it to look like it's going on forever, like Blade Runner. Yeah, I don't want to breathe. I want us to be overwhelmed and kind of intimidated by the size of this magnificent thing. So at some point, I will copy or create another layer behind this this sort of mid-ground um, part of the city that I'm building there. You also want to create something that is not sort of the same everywhere. So yeah, it's a bit like a piece of music. So you imagine a lot of notes. So there's a lot of notes that are similar, and then sometimes there's a big accent or something. So maybe one of the building is bigger. Yeah, so it creates a focal point here and there. Yeah, and then other buildings, a lot of them are small and similar. And yeah, so that it's interesting. Yeah, nothing is boring. You don't build the same house everywhere. If you look at some some of the early video games and everything looks the same, fake. Now everybody's trying to do the most interesting environments that they can think of. So this is what I'm trying to do there. I tell that to the students too. I mean, don't make anything boring. And no windows should be boring. The buildings don't have to be the same size. They don't have to have the same color. The light could hit them differently. Everything. Yeah, make everything uh, like the real world, but even better. Yeah, it's sort of like you take the real world and you increase the level of craziness because you're an artist. You're presenting a possible world to the viewer, director, an art director, someone like that. Uh, Using a tiny brush there, I was trying to put a bit of light, imagining that it's maybe dusk or something like that, and so there is light in these buildings. Though if you're on a tree, you want to make sure, and everything is made of wood, you want to make sure that nothing catches fire. So yeah, I think there is a um, maybe not too much thinking, but it's something like that you have in the back of your mind, thinking, well, okay, let's not worry too much. Let's just create something that is cool, and we can figure out why they have lamps with fire. 16th century is fire, it's not electricity. Uh, Later, we can suggest things, and the viewer doesn't have to question that too much. So I was not happy with the depth of field there, so I was putting more building, sort of with a big brush strokes, and then using custom shapes to create more solidity. Yeah, because the painterly aspect there it can be a bit muddy after a while, and I want a mixture of sort of haze and solidity. That is what creates beauty, in my opinion. So, in some of the areas, you'll see roofs that are quite precise, and then at the bottom, it's all hazy. And so you play with the two different uh, uh, bits, a little bit like if you were making. I don't know, Chinese cooking, and you're making sweet and sour. So you have different feel that you put together, and it suddenly the meal is interesting. So this is well kind of the backstory there. Um, the Yeah, this is me doing the copying the image, pasting it, and putting it in the background because I really don't want this guy there. I want it to be busy all the way. I want depth, more stuff far away. Uh, and so I've used a copy paste on another layer, and I'm just erasing bits, and then I'm going to change some of the shapes so it doesn't look like it's a copy paste. Yeah, you would not guess that it's a copy paste after a while because your eye gets fooled by the bits that have changed. Well, hopefully that's the theory anyway. Um, yeah, quite struggling with this background there. It's just um, not happy until I have enough has created enough stuff. Also, the foreground, the fog at the bottom there, I was not also super happy. I thought it was too messy. Yeah, I knew I wanted haze at the bottom, but if it's too much, it's too much. So you have to put back some of the details, put back some of those tents using the square brush and all that stuff. Um, and yeah, I like to paint with these custom shapes like that. To create shapes and then paint it, create structure. You see there, I'm gonna precise this what this area of the city behind looks like. You see, so that triggers the eye. So you think there is more there, but I don't want to fill the whole image, and so I want to make sure that there are areas where it's still the sky, even though I'm going to add things in a minute. I made it even smaller because it kept on being too small to me. So I kept wanting to look at to get further and further away to make it look even bigger and bigger by moving our point of view further away. Uh, I'm trying to create a sort of a dock there and just painting some of the details back in the foreground and just keep moving the, the sort of the layers in the background there up uh, each other sorry fighting each other creating depth in the background and also in the foreground. I thought, well, I need maybe there's more tents where we are standing there. Imagine you're there. What you want is a logical place to be. So if you're doing an aerial shot, okay, you're God, you're flying above a city. But here I'm imagining I'm in the city somewhere on a rooftop, maybe taking a photo of this huge place. All right, so I didn't film the end, unfortunately, but I made this little GIF file with layers that I kept on the way. You can see the lot of changes, and there are people now at the bottom looking up. It's quite mysterious, but you see that the city doesn't end. Yeah, in the background there are more dirigible, more stuff going on, more, and the foreground has another deck level. So I hope you enjoy this.